Nabu and Akheeghar. In this episode, we're going to discuss wisdom, learning, and literature among the Assyrians. Today, in the midst of upheaval in Iraq, the Assyrian people living in the Nineveh plain and the town of Ankara, and all around what used to be Assyria, the heartland of Assyria, the people are engaged in attempting to create houses of learning and universities. A strange desire for a people often associated with a warrior culture. Authors have, over the past century of studying the Assyrians, attributed to them a certain military prowess and ruthlessness that would allow us to understand them as essentially a mighty warrior nation that ruled the ancient world and little more. Lord Byron's famous poem on Sennacherib's attack on Judea personifies this view. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears were like the stars on the sea, when the blue wave rolls mightily on deep Galilee. Western imagination was captured with the power of Assyria by the imagery conveyed in the Old Testament, in which God refers to the Assyrians as the rod of my anger and the staff in whose hands is my indignation. Isaiah 10:5. The biblical phrases and Victorian references to the ancient Assyrian legacy, however, certainly do not tell the whole story. It is clear that Assyria should rank as one of the greatest powers the world had seen. For over 1,000 years, Assyria managed to bring together what are today Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and parts of Iran and Turkey, as well as Cyprus, into one political entity, being ruled from the center in Nineveh. This is what Ashurbanipal, 883 to 859 BC, states. I am Ashurbanipal, the celebrated prince, who reveres the great gods, the fierce dragon, conqueror of the cities and mountains to their furthest extent, king of rulers, who has tamed the stiff-necked peoples, who is crowned with splendor, who is not afraid of battle, the merciless champion who shakes resistance, the glorious king, the shepherd, the protection of the whole world, the king, the word of whose mouth destroys mountains and seas, who by his lordly attack has forced fierce and merciless kings from the rising to the setting sun to acknowledge one rule. One rule. The Assyrians, however, despite their military might, respected the cultures and religions around them. History never records any attempt at the forced conversions of the subjects of the Assyrian Empire. The Old Testament observed the greatness and beauty of Assyria in Ezekiel 31, 2 through 9. The greatness of Assyria was not based on military might alone, but on its people's wisdom, ingenuity, and perseverance in learning, of literature, of the sciences, of religion, and of the current and past events. The Assyrians, as the longest reigning people in Mesopotamia, valued learning. They were curious, and they wrote about it. They questioned the heavens and the stars, and became great at astronomy. Today, scholars are discussing the nature of the Nimrod lens, a piece of quartz unearthed by the archaeologist Austin Henry Layard in 1850 in an Assyrian palace. Some believe that it is proof of an ancient Assyrian telescope, which would explain the great accuracy of Assyrian astronomy. There are references and reports with dates, but without any religious interpretation, from teams of scribes of Assyrians in various cities, Arbela, Nineveh, and Ashur, reporting to the king various developments in the heavens as they observed them. One scholar in the city of Ashur writes to the king, quote, concerning the watch about which the king my lord wrote to me, we shall keep and we shall write, end of quote. And so they did, inspired by Nabu, a god known as the patron lord of the scribes. The scribes of Assyria created a volume of records and writings unrivaled in the ancient world. Probably, states André Perot in his famed The Arts of Assyria, quote, "No other ancient civilization has bequeathed to the world so vast a corpus of documents," end of quote. At Nineveh and other ancient cities of Assyria, hundreds of libraries were found. These not only included writings of the day, but of recorded texts from thousands of years earlier, showing us their incredible desire for knowledge and learning. One king, Ashurbanipal, observes, quote, "I, Ashurbanipal, within the palace, took care of the wisdom of Nabu, the whole of the inscribed tablets, of all of the clay tablets, the whole of their mysteries and difficulties I solved," end of quote. Ashurbanipal prided himself in learning the ancient language of the Sumerians and of cracking mathematical codes. He assembled in Nineveh the first systematically collected and cataloged library in the ancient world, which contained approximately 20,000 Assyrian tablets and fragments that have been preserved in the British Museum. At royal command, scribes searched out and collected or copied texts of every genre from temple libraries. Texts based on observation of events, of the behavior and feature of men, animals, and plants, and on the motion of the sun, the moon, planets, and stars. Texts listed in dictionary form the language of the Sumerian and Akkadian, and all other words, all essential to the scribal educational system. Ashurbanipal also collected many incantations, prayers, rituals, fables, proverbs, and other canonical and extra-canonical texts. The traditional Mesopotamian epics, such as the stories of the creation, Gilgamesh, Etana, and Anzu, have survived mainly due to their preservation in the Ashurbanipal Library. The presence of handbooks, scientific texts, and folk tales, for example, The Poor Man of Nippur, was a precursor of the 1001 Nights of Baghdad, show us that this library, of which only a fraction of the clay tablets has survived, was more than a mere reference library geared to the needs of diviners and others responsible for the king's spiritual security. It covered the whole range of Ashurbanipal's personal, literary interests, and many works bear the royal mark of ownership in the colophons. Scribes in Assyria had positions of respect. Assyrian cities and palaces teemed with scribes and students of literature. These scribes worked with cuneiform tablets and with a language we now know as Aramaic today, which the Greeks, Egyptians, and Hebrews called the writing of the Assyrians, or Kitav Ashuri. The palace scribe was a person of influence and one of the king's most trusted officials. As a display of reverence and respect, the Assyrian king authorized the palace scribe to act on his behalf in legal and business matters. Hence, Nabu Akhheeghar, the palace scribe of Sargon II, who lived or reigned from 721 to 705 BC, purchased land on which the new royal city of Dur-Sharrukin was to be built. The palace scribe also collaborated closely with the treasurer, who held a key role in administering the state finances. These two officials can be described as the highest-ranking bureaucrats in Assyria's civil administration. The achievements of the scribes of Assyria in law, medicine, literature, astronomy, and astrology, and a host of other studies created a record unrivaled in its breadth and volume until perhaps the coming of the British Empire. Little wonder that it took the University of Chicago over 90 years to complete the Assyrian Dictionary project. Over 90 years. The fall of Assyria in 612 BC did not dampen, despite the great devastation and suffering of its people, the spirit of learning and literature which passed to Greece, Rome, and the entire Western world. In Aramaic or Syriac, the Assyrians wrote about Akheeghar the wise, Akheeghar Hakima, and quoted his writings. In this story, Akheeghar was a chancellor to the Assyrian king Sennacherib, and after him, Assyrian king Sarhaddon. As the story of Akheeghar unfolds, he offers sayings of wisdom that are often quoted by Assyrians and the world today. For example, what is pleasing to Shemesh? One who drinks wine and shares it, one who guards wisdom, and one who hears a word and does not tell. For those that like to talk, beware, so that it does not become your undoing. More than all watchfulness, watch your mouth, and over what you have heard, harden your heart. For a word is a bird, once released, no man can recapture it. Many are the stars of heaven whose names no man knows. By the same token, no man knows mankind. Akheeghar tells us to get to work. If you become hungry, my son, take every trouble and do great labor, so that you can eat and be satisfied and give to thy children. If you become needy, my son, borrow corn and wheat, so that you can eat and be full and give to your children. For those of us dealing with difficult banks, take not a heavy loan or from an evil man. Moreover, if thou dost take a loan, give no rest to yourself until you repay the loan. A loan is sweet, says Akheeghar, but its repayment is grief. For a man's charm is his truthfulness, his repulsiveness the lies of his lips. At first, a throne is set up for the liar, but in the end, they can find out his lies and spit in his face. Despise not that which is thy lot, nor covet a wealth which is denied thee. Multiply not riches, and make not great thy heart. Whosoever takes no pride in the names of his father and mother, may the sun not shine upon him, for he is a wicked man. He also tells us to be nice, but not too nice. Be not too sweet, lest they swallow thee. Be not too bitter, lest they spit thee out. And for those who are thinking about fighting fire with fire, this is what the Assyrian advisor to the kings says. If your enemy meets you with evil, you meet him with wisdom. Ashurbanipal and Akheeghar's legacies continue to be upheld by the Assyrians into Christian times. Mar Ephrem, or Saint Ephrem the Great saint of Syriac churches, as well as other churches in the world, was a man of learning. Writers throughout the centuries have been astonished at his erudition and spiritual depth, which transcended the language that he used. Born in Nablus, Assyria, in 306 AD, he was a man who valued learning. And this is what he says: Lord, give learning to he who desires to learn, and to the master who teaches well, make great in your kingdom. Alaha how yulpana, al-ayn dracham yulpana, wal-rabbid malib shapir, weeday rabbab malkutach. It was in this spirit which prompted the Assyrians to accomplish another great feat of learning, the founding of the very first university in the world. When asked to name the first university in the world, we often think of universities of Bologna in Spain, and then of Oxford and Cambridge. Some have even mentioned Al-Azhar, University in Egypt, which gave its first lecture in 975 AD. Very few, however, recall that Maraprim founded the first University of Nasibin, or Nasibis, in Assyria, in what is southeastern Turkey today, in 350 AD. Here, students studied philosophy, theology, and medicine, and ushered in an age of learning that transmitted knowledge across the world. Works of Aristotle and other Greek philosophers were translated into Syriac, the writing of the Assyrians, and then into Arabic to enrich what became the golden age of Islam. It was the University of Nasibis that led to the creation of what is known as the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which is also known as a university of sorts, and to the proliferation of sciences under the Arabs in Islam, for which the Assyrians have been credited but little. The legacy has never been forgotten by the Assyrians, who in desperate times of the First World War and among refugee camps went about collecting funds themselves to create printing presses and schools. That is the story of Reverend Yosef DeKelaita, whose mission was to teach the Assyrians their language and culture and history in the aftermath of a most tumultuous period. It is for this reason, and in reverence of Nabu and Akheeghar, and in memory of Ashurbanipal, that Assyrians in Nineveh and Arbela today long for the completion of their universities and houses of learning. Learning is not compulsory, neither is survival, said Edwards Deming. The Assyrians of today not only take their legacy of learning as a point of pride, but as the very basis of their future survival. Thank you, and see you next time.